We are live now. I know.
We are live now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second edition of our book club. And thanks, Andrew, Mauro, Sylvia, and Harshit for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for participating very heartily yesterday on My Global Team Day. We had a lot of entries, and we will do a selection out of those entries for the prizes which we have announced. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, I'll pass it on to Andrew. Andrew, why don't you start? Let me just put the book cover on the screen.
Okay.
Just a second. Ta-da. Can we see the cover? Yes.
Here we are.
Let me put you on.
Okay. Good evening. Well, hello everyone. Good evening, as it is here in Scotland. I wanted to talk about Salt to the Sea, which you can see on the screen there. It's written by a Lithuanian-American writer called now Ruta Šepetis, I think is how you pronounce it, more or less. I want to ask you guys, have any of you ever heard of the ship, the Wilhelm Gustloff?
Mm-hmm.
No? Sylvia, have you heard of it?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, so that's 1 out of 5 then, and that's about right. So the book, The Salt to the Sea, ends, and you know this, so this is not a spoiler I'm giving you, with the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff, which is the greatest maritime disaster in history. And yet 4 out of the 5 of us hadn't ever heard of this ship and this event. So it was part of Operation Hannibal, which was when East Prussia was being evacuated very much at the last minute, as the Germans were losing the war in 1945 and the Red Army, the Soviet Red Army, was closing in on the population. So this is historical fiction. It's for teens. It's a YA book. It's not just me who loves it, though I do love it very much. It won the Carnegie Medal here in the UK in 2017. It's the second of Ruta's books that I've read, the first being Between Shades of Grey, which is also a fantastic book that I'd recommend. And Salt to the Sea is really one of those stories that really stayed with me since I read it last year. It shows well, I think, how history repeats itself and kind of echoes through the ages somewhat. It's a refugee story, so that is something that is still very much on my mind and very much in the news, certainly here in the UK, with talks of migrant boats coming across the channel from France, and certain people in the UK, I'm ashamed to say, wishing that our Navy would go in and torpedo these poor refugees and migrants fleeing or trying to get over to the UK. Also, it's, I think, dealing with another topic that's sort of very much a hot topic at the moment, which is history, how we know it, who gets to tell it, who gets marginalized and forgotten. And obviously this is being very much debated now, where Black Lives Matter being one aspect of that, but certainly not the only one. So Ruta Šepetis sets out to tell the stories of ordinary people. In this instance, the victims, refugees who'd fled to get onto the Wilhelm Gustloff and try and escape Prussia to safety. And she wants to tell their story. It's an ordinary person, maybe a victim story. These are the victims of the very well-known villains of history, Stalin and Hitler. Ruta herself is the daughter of a refugee, and I think perhaps that's why this book resonates so well, is that it's something that's her own family history is sort of steeped in. It's an alternating narrative told from the point of view of 4 young people 3 of whom are refugees, and one's actually a Nazi sailor. And they all need to get out of Prussia in front of the Red Army. What happened with the Wilhelm Gustloff is it was part of Operation Hannibal, which was the biggest maritime evacuation in wartime history, which did successfully evacuate 2 million people from Prussia. Unfortunately, it did, as I've said, involve this sinking, the worst maritime disaster, where there were 10,000 people crammed on board the Wilhelm Gustloff, which had a capacity for just 1,400 passengers. So it says that they think that 9,343 people actually died in this disaster, 5,000 of them being children. So this is an absolute tragedy, and I think even more of a tragedy that's compounded by the fact that we've largely forgotten it in the modern era. So the narratives are, as I've said, 4 different characters. There's a Lithuanian girl, young woman, a Polish girl, a Prussian boy, and this young German sailor. Their names being Joanna, Emilia, Florian, and Alfred. And Ruta really set out to grant people a voice. It seems really important now. She actually starts the book with a quote from Primo Levi, saying, "We, the survivors, are not the true witnesses of history in this instance. The true witnesses are those in possession, and those in the possession of the unspeakable truth are the drowned, the dead, and the disappeared." And that really fits into the theme of this story so well. So what happened with the Gustloff is that it was torpedoed by a Soviet submarine once it was afloat. But the narrative of this book really deals with how those 4 young people get to the Wilhelm Gustloff. So I am now, if I can find it, going to read actually the opening of each of their stories. I will focus more on Joanna's because I think it's the first one and the one that explains best kind of the refugee situation. Guilt is a hunter. My conscience mocked me, picking fights like a petulant child. "It's all your fault," the voice whispered. I quickened my pace and caught up with our small group. The Germans would march us off the field if they found us. Roads were reserved for the military. Evacuation orders hadn't been issued, and anyone fleeing East Prussia was branded a deserter. But what did that matter? I became a deserter 4 years ago when I fled from Lithuania. Lithuania. I'd left in 1941. What was happening at home? Were the dreadful things whispered in the streets true? We approached a mound on the side of the road. The small boy in front of me whimpered and pointed. He'd joined us 2 days prior, just wandered out of the forest alone and quietly began following us. "Hello, little one. How old are you?" I'd asked. 6, he replied. "Who are you traveling with?" He paused, dropped his head. "My Omi." I turned towards the woods to see if his grandmother had emerged. "Where is your Omi now?" I asked. The wandering boy looked at me, his pale eyes wide. She didn't wake up. So the little boy travelled with us, often drifting just slightly ahead or behind. And now he's pointing to a flap of dark wall beneath a meringue of snow. I waved the group onward, and when everyone advanced, I ran to the snow-covered heap. The wind lifted a layer of icy flakes, revealing the dead blue face of a woman, probably in her 20s. Her mouth and eyes were hinged open, fixed in fear. I dug through her iced pockets, but they'd already been picked. So then I'm going to go on to Florian. So where Joanna starts, guilt is a hunter, Florian is fate is a hunter. Engines buzzed in a swarm above, the Schwarze Tod, the Black Death, they called them. I hid beneath the trees. The planes weren't visible, but I felt them, close, trapped by darkness, both ahead and behind. I weighed my options. An explosion detonated and death crept closer, curling around me in fingers of smoke. I ran. And then we get to Emilia's story. So she is the Polish woman. Shame is a hunter. I would rest a moment. I had a moment, didn't I? I slid across the cold, hard earth towards the back of the cave. The ground quivered. Soldiers were close. I had to move, but I felt so tired. It was a good idea to put branches over the mouth of the forest cellar, wasn't it? No one would trek this far off the road, would they? And I think here you can kind of get the sense that this is a really traumatized young woman. She builds up through the story a narrative of what's happened to her. She's pregnant. You find this out fairly early on. And the father of her unborn child is a boy called August, who was the son of the family that she had been evacuated to from the city. You find out what actually happened, and you find out that this is some form of delusion, a story that she has built up in her own head to protect herself. I think the empathy in this book is one of its strongest points. On which point I come to Alfred, who is the young German sailor. He also, I would say, is somewhat deluded, and he's absolutely an acolyte of Adolf Hitler. He quotes quite often in his part of the story from Mein Kampf, and his story is mostly told through the imagined letters that he's writing in his mind to his sweetheart back at home. Now, she is a Jewish German girl. He is an avowed Nazi. And that will tell you something of the delusion that's going on in this young man's mind. But also just the way this opens. Fear is a hunter. It tells you where he is, I think, even though he's not acknowledging it to himself. So and this is what he writes. But brave warriors, we brush away fear with the flick of a wrist. We laugh in the face of fear, kick it like a stone across the street. Yes, Hannah, I compose these letters in my mind first, as I cannot abandon my men as often as I think of you. You would be proud of your watchful companion, Sailor Alfred Frick. Today I saved a young woman from falling into the sea. It was nothing, really. She was so grateful she clung to me, not wanting to let go. Thank you, sailor. A warm whisper lingered in my ear. She was quite pretty and smelled like fresh eggs, but there have been many grateful and pretty girls. Oh, do not be concerned. And he just does go on in that vein. He's not a likable character, but somehow the way Ruta wrote him, I did find myself feeling a degree of empathy, sympathy for him, because he has been tricked, I think, into how he feels and what he thinks. And I think it's a very clever thing to write a character who is just like anathema to me, everything he thinks and says, and yet I somehow relate to him. And I think that's a really clever thing for a writer to be able to do. Anyway, so that I can't really say more without giving spoilers to what happens in the story, and we've been told not to do that, so I kind of have to stop there. But
who is the publisher?
It's the Penguin Group. In the US, I believe it was Philomel, and it was originally published in the US, but published by Penguin in the UK as well.
And how did you find the book? Where did you find the book?
So I read Between Shades of Grey. I was actually given a copy of it when I had a meeting with the editor in New York years ago. And I was in my local library here in Perth, and I saw it. And I'm not sure I'd even heard of the book until I just saw it there on a shelf in the library. And I thought, well, I loved the only other book of hers I read, so I picked it up, took it home, and actually loved this even more. And that's how I found it.
Andrew, just tell me about she made what, a sort of a historical background research on the facts.
Yeah.
The author, and then there he had fictitious character, right? So you find a very dramatic balance. It it seems to me, with a lot of details, critical, historical details, so that you know something
Yes.
real. But at the same time, I was able to build up the drama, building up the character.
She did a lot of research.
And
I watched a video that she done. I watched it earlier just to see her take on it. And I think she said she researched it for 3 years, and she actually went to Poland. So what was East Prussia is now part of Poland. She went there to do part of her research, spoke to people, spoke to divers who had been down recently, and also some of the very first divers to go down there, because the Wilhelm Gustloff is one of several ships that was torpedoed during the Second World War, and they're still down there. And it's just like a mass grave, really. I mean, it's a terrible thing. So she spoke to them. It was actually her father's cousin who recommended that, who suggested to her that she should write the story about the Wilhelm Gustloff. Now, obviously, her father's cousin's also got a Lithuanian background, was also a refugee. She, it seems, did not manage to get away from the Red Army and was actually there. Whereas her father, Ruta's father, did escape, and hence she lives in the US. Some of her family are still there. So she's also got that very real connection. And all of that really comes through in the way it feels. We talk about authenticity, and it really feels completely authentic. She's expertly written her stuff. And on the side, just on the mention of her kind of impetus for this, is she says in all of her historical writings, she wants to tell the histories of where maybe entire populations have sort of fallen through the gaps of history. Their stories are just not told. And that's what she sets out to do. And I find that really moving.
It is quite moving.
I think what's interesting is, what I found interesting is that you said it's a YA fiction, right? It's a young adult fiction, right? And the subject and the topic and the treatment sounds like pretty grave and sublime book. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's all pretty hard-hitting stuff, but I think it's a matter of voice. Because she does capture that very well. I mean, from 4 different perspectives. It reads like young people.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing this. It was
Thanks a lot.
Such a discovery. I think I will add particularly this book to my list, and maybe
I'm going to reread it now because I'm feeling quite fired up to go back and have another look.
I've already made a note.
I'm not rereading books, because the second time, the third time you read it, and then you find a lot of minor details and minute details. For instance, every year I read The Catcher in the Rye, and every year I find something in it. So that's a sort of beauty in rereading. On that thought, we'll move to Mauro. Mauro is a very seasoned book club member. He's joining us for the second time. While Mauro sets himself up, let me just bring up the cover, which he will be talking about today. Ooh. I don't know. So for some reason, I'm not able to open it. But why don't you start, and then I'll just bring up the cover.
I am starting to present this book, which is a bit more cheerful than the story that Andrew presented. Anyway, but is in a way, well, I start introducing, so and I do it in French a bit. So je vais présenter un titre. Il s'appelle L'élégance del riccio, publié en 2006 par Gallimard. Et in Italie publié en 2007 par EO et en 2008 par Europa Books aux États-Unis et Gallic Books au Royaume-Uni. Il est devenu un phénomène en France, aussi en Italie. Il s'appelle, les titres, c'est L'élégance de Harrison par Muriel Barbery. The story of the book I had to tell in English. In a way, is again about the neglected, as I retake a topic on which Andrew has already said. Neglected and the stereotype that we have on people. The reason I chose this book is because, just to let you know, in France it sold 2 million copies, and in France, in Italy, I think he sold 1 million. And is also something we discussed on previous discussion on this group, how international bestseller, not in English, find very difficult to be translated into English language unless they become a sensation. This was one. It was published in English 2 years after it was already published in the original language. The story is in Paris, in Rue de Grenelle. Is an area in Paris between the 6th and the 7th arrondissement. And the stereotype of an elderly lady who is the concierge of a building where very rich champagne socialists family live. But she is not what you think, because she actually is the person trying to make the people believe on the stereotype. So she actually reinforces the prejudice and the stereotype that people have on a Portuguese immigrant that ended up in France and probably have no education whatsoever. And all she does is looking at telenovelas and not doing much else rather than gossiping. It's difficult not to give much away, but what happened, there is a bond that throughout the book is created, which is from between her and a 12 years old girl from one of the family that live in the building, which she's already too mature and too ahead of her age. And she's actually the first that recognize that actually Renee, the name of the lady cleaning the building, is not what she looks like. And they become friends. There is another character which arrives later on throughout the book, which is a Japanese businessman called, let me just see, Kakuro Ozu, another person that actually sees through her for what she really is. I think the whole book is a metaphor on how quickly we are, everybody is to make judgment on people without really spending the time to actually analyze all the facts or to bother really trying to know someone better to make a true judgment on who they are. The reason why I love this book is because the story is very well written and I really liked it. I think it's one of the very few books, I was reading between Old Street and Clapham North, so it's around 20 minutes ride on the tube, and I had to get off the tube because I was crying at the end of the book, and I could not handle it. I just could not handle the reading anymore. So I had to basically stop at the station, get out at the station, and just reread what I just read, and then to carry on my journey. I highly recommend it. Is very, very simple story. No, it doesn't require much time anyway, or concentration. I would say it's not historical fiction, or it's not something, but it's a wonderful, wonderful tale, which I highly recommend. And it's actually one of the books that I like to give away, to buy for friends as a present. So if you have any questions on the book, and here, this is the Italian edition, which
Okay.
I just the success. They never did the paperback edition. They just did always the hardcover. And this is the reissue they done recently because it's still so successful.
And Mauro, could you say that she was able to depict a moment in time, a moment in European history somehow? Or
No, I think I would say is contemporary because it was written in 2006, and the face the time that everybody live, but the main character live in a building where everybody is rich and they are too busy and concentrated on their own thing. Actually, I would like to read a quote from the book, which is, I have read so many books, and yet, like most autodidacts, I am never quite sure of what I have gained from them. There are days when I feel I have been able to grasp all there is to know in one single gaze, as if invisible branches suddenly spring out of nowhere, waving together all the disparate strands of my reading. And then suddenly the meaning escapes, the essence evaporates, and no matter how often I reread the same lines, they seem to flee ever further. With each subsequent reading, and I see myself and some mad old fool who thinks her stomach is full because she's been reading the menu. And yes, so this is the book. It has been translated into many languages. So the UK edition exists, the US edition exists, Italian, Spanish, Korean, French. This is my book of the month for me.
Wonderful. Thank you.
What's the English title for it, for the translated one?
The Elegance of the Eject. Basically, the translation of Riccio, her song, is exactly the same. The translation has been done. Basically, Riccio is an animal, okay, and the translation of the title has been done exactly the same everywhere.
Muriel Barbary.
So yeah, the elegance of Riccio.
The Elegance of the Hedgehog.
Thank you so much for introducing us to this book. And as we all request every time, that once the session is over, please go create a post on the group and share the book which you have talked about. Please do that.
It's
after the
11
session is
o'clock.
over. And on that thought, I'll invite Harshit to start presentation of the choice of his book. Harshit, over to you.
Thanks, Prashant. Actually, I'm going to talk about a classic which maybe some of you might have heard of. The book is called A Passage to India by E.M. Forster. Anyone read this already? Andrew, you might have.
Yeah, it's quite a long time ago,
Long
but
time
yeah, I
ago, yeah.
have.
The,
Yeah.
the reason I thought I read it in school long time back, and it didn't make much sense back then. I did my master's from University of Liverpool in post-colonial studies back in 2002 till 5. So when I read it back in England, it had a different meaning. And when I came back to India, and I've been teaching this to my students, I teach English literature. It had a completely different twist. So I've been talking about this book to a lot of people. I want more people to read it because it's one of the finest classic books that have been written in the last 100 years. A Passage to India. E.M. Forster, a liberal who came to India in 1920s. It was still British India, part of British Empire. The title Passage to India comes from Walt Whitman's old poem, and it also has some connotations. So when I first read it, first reading, I mean, the long time back when I read it in England, I thought it's an Englishman coming to India for the first time, trying to understand how the country is, the culture is. It's kind of a documentary. It's kind of an Englishman's perspective on how things are. But as I've read it a few times, around 10 to 12 times, and as I've been teaching, what I figured out is what E.M. Forster wrote in this book 100 years ago is still being, analyzed and dissected, and still there are layers and layers of meanings. What Morrow just talked about in that book about stereotypes, right? That really grabbed my attention. Then when you talked about stereotypes, how that book talked about how we perceive things in a very rigid societal framework. Forster's book, this Passage to India, is a study in studying Indian stereotypes from Englishman's perspective. Someone who's trying to be not on either side. That is very difficult thing to be, very in a very difficult place to be. So he's an Englishman who visits India, who's an Indian English colony. He tries not to sympathize or patronize the Indians or the Indian situation, and he tries not to, assert much of his Englishness. So that's a very very difficult position to be in. So he works with stereotypes. So the entire book, the first critical problem that I had with the book is that he's only working with English and Indian stereotypes, only a handful of characters which are very specific tight stereotypes. So there are racist Britishers, part of the British India. There is a teacher who's on a civilizing mission to India. Then there are only a very few handful characters, Indian characters. There is one Muslim character and one Hindu character. That's it. So it's kind of I was a little disturbed about it for a long time that he has reduced down the entire Indian demography to two religion based characters. But I now understand why he did this. And the reading of this book is as an Indian, who spent time in Europe, studied European history. Uh, I studied in England. I studied literature in England. As an Indian, it talks to me in a different narrative. As a European, it talks to them in a different narrative. As an American, I've discussed this book with people from all over the world, and it talks differently to everyone. So I would really welcome all of you to reread this book and maybe discuss what you think about it. I'll read the first passage from first chapter. And yeah, the structuring of the book is quite interesting. As I said, he has reduced down the entire narrative about India. The characters are very stereotyped, very fixed, which initially I thought was a problem, but there is a very sublime reason for it. He's also structured the entire book only in three parts. The first part is called the mosque, second is called the caves, and the third is called the temple. So again, that religious demographic divide, which as a shallow, superficial reader, when I read it for the first time, I found it a little reductionary, and I was like, this is not right. This was published in 1924 in England, so it's still British India, and he had said things, he had to say things which, practically speaking, he could not under the British Empire's reign. But he used literature and he used the figures of speech, metaphors, all kind of symbols. The structuring of the book is a symbol in itself. He said everything that he wanted to say without infuriating anyone. Took people, at least the first major critical essay came on this book around 50 years after it was published. So it's still, people are still trying to desiccate it, still trying to understand it, still trying to mean what he says. So I'll read the first paragraph of the first chapter. It's crucial because this is where he's describing India for the first time. So the book's title is A Passage to India. How traditionally in 1920s, how traditionally a Westerner would look at India, right? So this paragraph gives you a little insight of that. There is a little echo. I am hearing little echo. Prashant, is the voice fine? Audio?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
absolutely.
Yeah,
It's
I
absolutely
was seeing some
carry
echo.
on. Yeah.
So I'll read the first paragraph. This describes India as, according to E.M. Foster, a typical Westerner would perceive it, or Europeans never visited India, never having set foot on the Indian land or the Indian subcontinent. How is it perceived? So when I first read this paragraph, I was actually offended until I realized better later. So this is how it starts. Except for the Marabar caves, and they are 20 miles off, the city of Chandrapur presents nothing extraordinary. Edged rather than washed by the river Ganges, it trails for a couple of miles along the bank, scarcely distinguishable from the rubbish it deposits so freely. Now, the river Ganges is the holy river in the Indian culture and tradition. And in the first four lines, it is described like this, that it deposits rubbish ever so freely. There are no bathing steps on the riverfront, as the Ganges happen not to be holy here. Indeed, there is no riverfront, and bazaars shut out the wide and shifting panorama of the stream. The streets are mean, the temples ineffective, and though a few fine houses exist, they are hidden away in gardens or down alleys whose filth deters all but the invited guest. Chandrapur was never large or beautiful, but 200 years ago it lay on the road between Upper India, then Imperial, and the sea. And the fine houses date from that period. The zest for decoration stopped in the 18th century, nor was it ever democratic. So in the 18th century, India was under the rule of the Mughal Empire. So he's pointing at that the zest for decoration stopped in the 18th century, nor was it ever democratic. There is no painting and scarcely any carving in the bazaars. The very wood seems made of mud. Inhabitants of mud moving. So abased, so monotonous is everything that meets the eye that when the Ganges comes down, it might be expected to wash the excrescence back into the soil. Houses do fall, people are drowned and left rotting, but the general outline of the town persists. Swelling here, shrinking there like some low but indestructible form of life. That's the first. That's how the book opens, and that's how he describes this city of Chandrapur in the book. And carrying on, this carries on. Then he introduces the characters. So that's the reason I like this book. Is one, because E.M. Forster is one of the finest novelists. He has a big role in working on this genre in the 20th century. I've read all his books. I'm a huge fan. Politically, it's a major book. It's still being described and dissected. Now, 100 years on, we can talk about it. This is the kind of book that has found readers now, and I think more young people, both Europeans and Indians, should read it and understand how a writer can say things which normally in his contemporary sociopolitics would not be allowed to say. But he uses art and craft to say and deliver things which are well relevant even 100 years to in 200 years down the line. I would really recommend everyone to read this and maybe discuss it again. That's it from my part.
That's so wonderful. Rashid, you said that you were initially offended when you read the first paragraph.
Yeah.
Then, when you move forward, it changed. What changed, and I mean, how do you perceive?
I this is my reading, but I realize that Foster is presenting a traditional perspective of India in the same language as the readers would expect it in Europe. So what people expected in Europe, that a mystical land, exotic land, he has completely shattered that in the first paragraph. He's presented the reality as he saw. And he starts off with the major Indian symbols like the river Ganga. He starts off with that, and so it's really interesting. It's an amazing word craftry and amazing delivery. Lot to learn.
Thank you so much for sharing this, and it's really interesting. In Indian, I have not read it and not yet
I think
read
I think it's one of those books.
it.
Is isn't it from the 20s? I think it was written in the 20s. I think it's one of those
Yeah,
books that
1920s,
Yeah,
never
1920s.
age. It's one of those books that never age.
yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
And I'm very surprised that you picked up this book because from outside you feel that when you speak about, I mean, there is a cartooning. I'm sorry. When you speak about colonialism, it is always a problem because it looks like that civilization,
Hmm.
they are black or white, they are winter or winter,
Absolutely.
but life is not like
Absolutely.
that. The civilization, they just up, and to imagine that for you, Foster is not a wound
Hmm.
still bleeding, but is something that you can cope and discuss and surrender to a vision and to
Hmm.
say, yes, that's correct, and we can discuss it, is really overcoming history and making a new history with the past. That's very interesting. I was surprised that you picked up passages
So
in
he
India,
keeps
which is really
surprising me
good.
because
Very good.
I'm also an author. So when I read books, I also like to learn what what are they doing, what's actually happening in that book in terms of the craft. So what he has managed to do, which very few authors can do, he stands away from the social narrative where he grew up and socio-politic narrative. He manages to stand out of it and look within objectively. That is, I think, the hardest thing for an author to be able to do. So that's what intrigued me, and that's what I try to learn. Book.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Harshit. And now we move on to Sylvia. Sylvia, let me just set it up, and you can start talking about the book. And I'm gonna try one thing, Sylvia. If you guys give me a little time, let me just see if I can. Sylvia shared a video with me, and I've
Okay.
tried to download it, and I'll try and run that video. If that video works and you're able to hear the sound and everything, this is something really new for me. And it's not a very long video. We'll try and run that. We will, and if that works, let's see. Let me just see if I could.
Stay in lockdown, Prashant. You're losing your touch as a technological guru, may I say.
I was never a guru. I was just making this up as I was going on. And somehow, when you do all these things, you get caught. And I'm getting caught, I believe. Okay, I'm gonna try playing this, and if you can hear the sound, you guys let me know. I mean, we can continue. If you don't, just stop me in between.
Prashant, it's just 1 minute, 1 minute 10, and then we stop. It's just the beginning, okay? Yeah.
Let's see if we can hear the sound.
Let's see.
This is a poem called Love After Love. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life.
Amore dopo amore. Tempo verrà in cui, con esultanza, saluterai te stesso arrivato alla tua porta, nel tuo proprio specchio, e ognuno sorriderà al benvenuto dell'altro e dirà: siedi qui, mangia. Amerai di nuovo lo straniero che era il tuo io. Offri vino, offri pane, rendi il cuore a se stesso, allo straniero che ti ha amato per tutta la tua vita, che ha ignorato per un altro e che ti sa a memoria. Dallo scaffale tira giù le lettere d'amore, le fotografie, le note disperate. Sbuccia via dallo specchio la tua immagine. Siediti, è festa, la tua vita è in tavola.
So probably many of you, thank you, Prashant. You were perfect. You're perfect. You're the best.
So much, yeah.
So as many of you maybe recognized him, he's Derek Walcott. He's we are talking about poetry tonight as well. Derek Walcott won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1992. He was born in 1930 in Santa Lucia, the Lesser Antilles. And Santa Lucia is north of Barbuda and Grenada and south to Antigua. So it's really on the tropic. The tropic can be squeezed between the north and the big poles of economic power and the equator. So sometimes the tropics are a place where you don't know exactly which voice you can have. Now, he's a Caribbean poet. He is a poet, a universal one. Why? Because he started to love, he was totally in love with the beauty and the splendor of the Caribbean. And in trying to search his identity, which was a very particular identity, he became universal. And this is the strength of his poetry, but it helped me a lot, because we are talking also about personal attitudes. It helped me a lot to understand that if you want to be universal, you want to be global, if you want to attain a universal language, you must understand yourself. You must go back to your origins, to your roots, and to your language. And it is very interesting because Walcott always lived in between Trinidad, Santa Lucia, and Boston and New York, where he taught at the Boston University for many years, and he died back in Santa Lucia as well. So what is interesting is that how he described himself. I wanted to show in a verse. He says, "I'm just a red nigger who loves the sea, had a sound colonial education. I have Dutch, nigger, and English in one. And either I'm nobody, or I am a multitude." What happens? That sometimes civilization, they crumbles, they decay, as it happened with Rome, Greece, and as it happening now with Western civilization maybe. And when the center crumbles, what happens? But what gives strength to something which crumbles, which decays? Not armies, not strength. Probably many times is the language. And where you can find where the language stays in the empires, very strangely enough, in the borders, in the province, in the outer province, where you are in the island, in the borders, where everything seems to be forgotten, not in the center of powers. This is what Derek Walcott did with English language. He's considered one of the best English poets of the second part of the 20th century, which is a lot. When you read it, you find in him what? You find Eliot, you find Pound, you find Greek literature, tragedy, drama. You have a big, because he had a big personality, big identity, a big feeling. What I wanted to mention to you was what Joseph Brodsky said. Contrary, Joseph Brodsky was friend to Derek Walcott, and he wrote a beautiful preface to this edition, the Adelphi edition in Italian. I must mention that Derek Walcott came many times to Italy, and that's why I met him personally. Various times I had the possibility to dialogue with him, to ask him questions. He had a wonderful translator, among many, like Roberto Mussapi, one of the best contemporary poets in Italy. And Joseph Brodsky say, contrary to what is usually believed, the periphery, the borders, are not the place where the world ends. On the contrary, borders and peripheries and provinces are the place where the world decants, like the wine, where it takes strength. So I can say to you, please, this Caribbean poet, I mentioned on Facebook one of his most well-known poems. I'm sorry, I feel. And I just wanted to tell you that he was able to tell you about in a way imaginative, profound, and present in times. I just mentioned two of these phrases in an interview. He said that there is always one tense in poetry, which is the present. And another sense, poet things happens. On the contrary of what we believe that poetry is something detached from reality, poetry is able to get into reality. And he's one of the best examples.
That's so wonderful, Sylvia.
I must say, this is the second time we do presentation of books, which also a sort of line. It happened without wanting it. First time round with the same lot of books, but again, is people, places, forgotten, stereotype, marginalized that don't give second thoughts in they're actually seeing the world, or they must be seeing the world in a different way than
Right.
mainstream, or in a way they're living a life that is not told because it looks like unimportant.
Right. Right.
But that's
I don't know. I mean, Prashant, are you pulling the string behind it to just? I don't know.
No, I'm not doing anything. I mean, it's something which, I mean, is happening by its own, and that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it. I mean, we are sitting in different parts of the world. We have different thinking, but I mean, somehow when it comes to book, and somehow when we want to share something about the book, it's something similar we pick up and share it with everyone, and that's, I think, that's how connected we are. That's how close we are. I mean, we are same, but we are different. I mean, if we talk about poetry, I mean, that's where we are, and it's yeah.
Salt to the sea. Apparently, we have it at home. I've been told by text that apparently we have it at home. So
good.
someone has already read it at home. I will be next.
Wonderful.
Good news. Sylvia, can I ask what's the name of the piece that Derek Walcott was reading in English? What's the title?
Is Love After Love, and I posted in our Facebook thread all the complete text.
It's in the comment section, and maybe I can just put it up for you. So there we are.
Love After Love.
Yeah.
Love After Love.
And
You know the best part
Useful.
when I was reciting it in Italian, I was hearing the word "lettre d'amore" again and again and again. So that was so lovely. So I think that means letter for love or letter of love.
Also, one also White Egrets is one of the last collection he wrote, which is really beautiful. And I must mention that what probably won his Nobel Prize was Homeros, like.
I think we are having a little bit of audio problem from your end, Sylvia. We are not able to hear you clearly. Could you hear a little louder?
Yeah.
Guys, if you don't mind, I have to drop off for a simple reason. Here there is a storm. I already was dropped off because there is a huge storm. But more importantly, the dog is driving me absolutely crazy because you can tell that the dog is so scared, and I really need to take care of. Okay.
I think on that, I think on that note we can wrap up the session. I mean, it was really lovely, and it was really kind for all of you to agree to come on the book club session, and I really hope that we can keep on continuing this, keep on growing this, and you can come back again and again every month, and at least we talk about say 50, I mean 5 books a month and 60 books a year, and that's something. And personally, as a project, I would really like to publish it somewhere. So that's what I want to do. And once again, I thank you everyone for doing this. I would really request of you to put in a post on the group and share which book you shared. don't talk much about the book. Ask the guys to come and watch the video.
Well, again, I
Sure.
don't think. I think we can only say always thank you to you and behind it. This is always a must for me. And
Absolutely.
thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Nice
It's
to
really
meet you
nice
all.
talking to everybody.
Have a great
Take
time.
care.
See
Thanks,
you in
Prashant.
the book club.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Ciao, Andrew. Ciao.